and to help highlight what some systems have managed to do with some of the data around alternative pathways, SDEC monitoring, but also in this sort of pre-hospital sphere of other contact with healthcare professionals before they end up in a hospital setting. So there's two. We haven't got Lincoln aren't coming, are they, Serena?
We have got Nick. We've got Nick
here.
Here
Oh,
from
it's
Lincoln.
Nick here as well. Brilliant.
Yes.
Okay, we've got three. So the agenda says two. We've actually got hi, Nick. We've actually got three pieces of work that we're going to share with you, and we're going to let Anna, David, and Nick talk to each of their bits because they know it much better than I do. But what I wanted to do was start with one slide that I see on a reasonably regular basis when I go to the national forum where we talk about the Midlands as a whole. I'm going to multitask and try and share a screen and talk at the same time. So the reason this is really, really important, I think, and the reason I wanted to share this with you is that we see the data that gets fed back from the national front back to our services through the regional teams and then back to you. But I'm not sure that you always see it. And I think what was really important for you as a system in particular was that you didn't necessarily have the ability to see your own data in a really timely way, in a really helpful way, for you to understand. So I'm only going to pick out this one representation of the Midlands as a whole. So these are all of the sites that provide same-day emergency care across the Midlands. And I think you can see that. Sabir, I can see your head. If you can see that, just nod. Yeah, brilliant. This is effectively a sort of a run plot of quantity and proportion of care that's provided in a same-day fashion by individual sites. And I'm going to pick the two of you out because you're relatively easy to track down. You are third from the top. So Kettering, this is you. You start red, and you can see as time has gone on, you change from being red to being amber to being sort of firmly coming into a green sort of colour as your improvement journey and your changes have kicked in over the last year or so. And then Northampton, you started from a slightly better position, but you can see that you've been firmly delivering a really huge quantity of your activity through same-day emergency care over the last year or so. And these are two really good stories. There are two really good news stories. The Midlands does pretty well at this. We've worked fairly hard as a region to make sure that we all do fairly well at this. But there's some really good stories in terms of your improvement. And I really want you to be able to see that for yourselves in your own services, rather than just have that information played back to you from the regional and the national team. Which is why having a dashboard that works effectively that's the wrong button. A dashboard that works effectively so that you've got control of your own data and you can see where your opportunities for further improvement sit, but also where you're doing and how well you're doing, so you can present your own stories to your own organisations to say, this is going brilliantly and this is room for us to do something slightly different, is so important. So that's why this is so important. And then we're going to move into seeing three different things. So what you're going to see, hopefully, is a dashboard from Derby. This is pretty much the Rolls-Royce of dashboards. I would love to know exactly how many hours and effort and sweat went into developing this, but this is a fantastic example of what can be done if you have the time and the resource and the ability, and it's brilliant. It's really, really good. But don't be terrified by it, because we're also going to show you some other things. We're going to show you at sort of the other end of a very similar but much more straightforward in its first iterations. This is by no means where it's going to end up in the long run. Will be Nick and Lincoln. So Lincoln have started much later in this game, but are using very much the same principles that the Derby team are using, but are something that I think is more accessible as a first iteration of things as you then move across. And David's also going to then talk about actually what the CCG data can look like and how that can play into things. So three really good opportunities. We're going to spend sort of about 15 minutes or so on each, or thereabouts. If you do have questions, put a hand up. I'll come to you and I'll track you down, and we'll let you sort of ask questions as we go along, because the teams that have created these will know the answers to any questions you might have about it far better than I. But we will start by going up the road to Derby and to Anna, if that's okay. Anna, it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just share my screen. So yeah, I just as a bit of background, I've worked in emergency care for many years, and I've been involved with avoidable admissions and all sorts over the years, which I think's really helped with developing this data set. And actually the longest, most difficult bit about this data set was defining what our SDEC services are and then building the data. Actually doing the dashboard was probably the less time consuming bit. It was just getting the engagement from clinical staff and building the data. Now it's quite complicated because some of our SDEC services are recorded under inpatients. Some of our services have moved forward and gone towards ECDS recording. And obviously there's the drive, isn't there, nationally to move towards ECDS, which will be another big challenge. However, we've got a mix of inpatient and ECDS. So to start off with, our dashboard opens up on a key KPI page, which does have weekly SPCs. So I was involved with our local SDEC steering group. We had many conversations about what are the KPIs we should be reporting. So we've kind of come up with some key ones on the landing page. So it's looking at conversions to SDEC. So how many patients as a percentage out of all of our emergency flow were discharged to an SDEC area. So that's your admission avoidance, which is the first chart here. And then we kind of wanted to look at how are we doing in compared to the total period of last month. So we have actually improved slightly, and we also have toggles because we've got different sites. We've got Royal Derby acute site and also our Queen's Hospital. So we've got a trust level view and a site view. We've also got a divisional view. So our SDEC services include medicine, surgical SDEC. We have got a cancer unwell area and also a paediatrics SDEC. And we also developed a pull measure. So that's looking at pulling people out of ED sooner and freeing up ED. So one of the measures we looked at here was the average time in ED. Now it has actually been trending up, and there has been questions raised is everyone actually going from ED to SDEC, suitable SDEC patients? Or is it just because we've had a very busy winter? So we just have to be conscious of that as well. And then we've got the avoid measure. So that's avoiding SDEC altogether. That's where patients have come in directly via GP, emergency clinic, etc. And then we've got just the SDEC discharges as a figure rather than a proportion. And then another interesting measure we looked at were missed opportunity. So this is a combination of diagnosis codes that are deemed ambulatory emergency care conditions that actually were admitted directly to a ward without hitting an SDEC and had a length of, say, of 0 to 3 days. And that's part of the NHS directory. So that's the KPI summary. I think if we have questions, can we save them to the end? Because then we've got an SDEC section. So this is looking at the SDEC services in more detail with some of the key KPIs again. So your SDEC discharges, your percentage rate of discharges to SDEC, and then those that got admitted. Again, we've got toggles between sites. We've got the average length of stay in SDEC in hours. We've also got a toggle view on this button, so you can actually look at, out of all of our emergency flow, so the orange bar is actual SDEC admissions. How does it stack up in terms of SDEC discharges, SDEC admissions, and your percentage of SDEC conversions or SDEC discharges? Another interesting factor is we're looking at the length of time of a patient is on average in ED before going to SDEC, and we can see it has been getting longer over the winter periods. And we've also got arrivals to SDEC by hour, that's through the whole period, and we have got slider bars where we can minimise the date range down, and again select certain divisions to drill through further. We've also got a view by weekday, so some of our SDEC services don't actually open fully at the weekends, and that will take us on nicely to apologies, I'm just going to go onto this tab. This tab's just all of our data into figures, because certain customers just like to go ahead, export the data and analyse further if they need to. But the missed opportunities is quite an interesting one, because it's looking at those admissions with the AEC conditions within a 0 to 3 day length of stay based on the coding. And what we've tried to do here is look at the length of stay groups and actually where are they going. So quite a few are going to assessment areas and then not going any further. And we also wanted to look at, because our SDEC areas aren't always open overnight, kind of, is this happening during times when actually the SDEC isn't open, and could that build a case to actually extend the opening hours of SDEC to free up those acute beds? And again, you've got a slider bar where you can view particular weeks. You can look at the view by weekday and also by ward again, and division and site. And then we've just thrown in all of our missed opportunities data, so that further improvement teams or analysts or divisional staff can actually analyse their areas further if they need to. And then we started working on an ED pool data section. So this was kind of like a temporary area that we need to evolve next. And it's looking at patients that transfer to SDEC by time spent in ED versus those that were missed opportunity. So potentially there's a lot more long waiters that have been the 0 to 3 day length of stay admissions with an SDEC condition. Could they potentially have gone to SDEC and freed up the capacity in A&E? So they're some of the key questions that our steering group's just getting going again. And I think this is kind of like deep dive areas that they will be looking into. And that's it. Are there any questions at all?
Anna, thank you very much. So by way of show of hands, or a wave of an arm, so I can see if I can see on camera, we'll take any questions for Anna. David.
That looks brilliant. The last slide about the avoidable admissions, is that done on diagnosis code?
Yes, it is. It's a combination of diagnosis and HRG, and I'm happy to share that directory with anyone. If you've got any questions, you want to know how it's all been mapped, I'm more than happy to do that.
That'd be wonderful. Yes, I think we'd like to, if you've got that, we'll build it into our monitoring.
And I think the tricky thing is now we're being challenged on how many bed days savings could we have if we increased our SDEC. It's quite an open thing, because although we've got this directory, actually how accurate is that in terms of, are they definitely missed opportunities? It's just a gauge really, because when we've had clinical input, they're saying, well, some of these patients we've audited couldn't possibly have gone to SDEC because actually they were admitted a few weeks before. So it's quite a challenging thing to look further when you've already got established SDEC services. Is there any more questions, please?
Thank you. Said, I think there was a hand up from you.
Yes, what I just want to know is, with the length of stay, when you said 0 to 3 days, are we keeping these sort of patients in the hospital in SDEC, or are they returner patients which are classed as the one care episode? How are we capturing that data?
So the 0 to 3 days, they have gone direct to a ward in our services. They've actually been admitted, but they're within the specific diagnosis coding, so they've not actually hit an SDEC area. So they could have gone to an assessment unit or direct to a bed-based area. Does that answer your question?
So that doesn't come under the MSDEC admission?
It doesn't within our group, because we've actually grouped particular ward areas that are SDEC, what we deem SDEC services. And I think the consensus is that as long as 80% of those types of patients are going through your SDEC areas, so they're not actually bed-based areas, they're more like chair or trolley-based areas without an overnight bed stay.
Yeah, so second question is, with the MSDEC, you said extended hours. May I ask what are your hours for SDEC operational hours? in total?
So we have got different services. We've got a surgical SDEC, but actually they are open all the time. Whereas some of our other areas, like our medical SDEC, I think they shut about 8 o'clock at night, and it's a reduced service over the weekend. And then we've got gynae assessment unit as well, and they are similar. They shut at a certain time overnight. I mean, what I can do is draft all of this up and share it with you about what SDEC services we've got, what are their opening hours, if that would be useful.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll put that down.
Fabulous. And then Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Yeah, I was just going to ask, would you mind sharing or emailing me a copy of your dashboard just so I can sort of expand on mine a bit more to almost steal some of yours, certainly your sliders, etc. Would that be okay? Because I mean, I've thrown mine together relatively quickly. The metrics, etc., very similar, but your presentation side of it, that's more what I'm interested in. Would you be able? Is that okay if I put my email address in the chat box?
Yeah, sure, that's absolutely fine. I'm happy to. I can develop this and share it to the group if anyone else is interested with all the things we've discussed. So the directory, just some screenshot examples.
Yeah, that'd be lovely. Yeah, from my point of view, I mean, I do use that directory myself. I am assuming it's the same one. It's more the presentation side of it, to be honest, which is sort of head and shoulders above what I've done, to be honest with you. That's where I'm looking to sort of expand on mine. Like I said, the metrics are pretty similar in terms of it. SDEC comes off the back of an inpatient data set. There is an ED separate data set, etc. It's very similar, to be honest with you. And that look up off the back of the ICD-10 codes, I assume that's what you were referring to.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, as far as I know, it's a national thing I use, so I dare say it's the same one as yours, to be honest with you, in terms of getting your metrics populated. But yeah, from my point of view, it's more the presentation side, actually, because I need to, mine's sort of very basic at the minute, because I only just completed it, to be honest with you, if that's okay, of course.
That's fine. Yeah, what package are you using to build it? Do you mind?
To start with, I've just started on an Excel sheet. That's all I've done. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to throw it together for our Lincoln equivalent of this call yesterday.
So this one's been built in Power BI, which is a very good package.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. Yeah.
We've only recently been trained in it, but it's very much like Microsoft product and very easy to use if you're used to Excel and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it looks very user friendly, to be fair. And I like the way you've done, because we also have 2 sites, but I kind of started with one site, then did another sheet for the other site, so I could combine them and then do a sort of trust wide one, like I think I saw on yours somewhere as well.
Yeah, so you could use your sliders, I guess. Like
yeah, that's sort of head and shoulders where yours is different, to be honest with you. I mean, mine's just set out in. It's really just a monthly dashboard, because I did base it on another dashboard for another thing what I use, but yeah, the presentation side of it on mine is something which is definitely I'm going to work on. So if you would mind, that'd be good. So
yeah, that's fine.
Not that I want to steal all your work, of course.
No, you can do. I'm happy. We're all one.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll definitely be stealing
department, aren't we? We're all the NHS.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sharing knowledge and what we're doing.
You're very kind. Thank you, Tom.
Right. Nick, brilliant. Lee, we're going to take one final question from you, and then we shall move on to the next offering.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, James. Yeah, just one question. I see that you've got within the dashboard the pull element. What about the push element from the ambulance service? How many are you measuring the number of admissions via an ambulance service, or are you just relying on the EDs sort of pulling into the SDECs?
Yeah, so I think until we've got our SDEC services recording data under emergency care data set, we can't really answer that very easily, because obviously ECDS, you capture the ambulance arrivals, whereas inpatients, it's not as granular, is it, as ECDS? So at the moment, we've only really got ED data, or actually the services that have started adopting ECDS, but I don't think the data accuracy is quite there yet because they only went live recently. But I think if we do move more services to ECDS recording, then we will have, how many turned up via ambulance. Does that help answer the question? Or?
It does, yeah. I think it just benchmarks where we are in Northamptonshire, really, that we are actually manually counting through the door at the SDEX. And I think that is sometimes some of the challenge, really, because it's a human factors element as well.
Lee, thank you very much. What you may well see is when Nick presents his, we'll come to David next and then to Nick, but Nick has got that detail within his. There is something perhaps of the ease of something that is less technologically advanced, perhaps allows some of the data to be inputted manually in a more straightforward way, and there is a sort of a balance of what you can get from either a sort of a very developed system versus one that is more pad and paper to a certain degree, and actually would give a flavour for the variation between the two. Right, Anna, thank you so much. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm sure there will be follow-up questions to you sort of via email and via other routes after this. But David, we'll come on to you next, if that's right with you.
Yes, that's fine. So hard act to follow there. That's looked very clear, very visually appealing. So I'm probably slightly different to others who are presenting because I'm working in Commissioner. So what we've got is let me know when you shared. So we've got information from all across the urgent care pathway. So within the hospital, we've got the SOS and the SLAM. Like Anna, the SDEC is a mixture of clinics, admissions, other things that might look like a elective. So there's a whole detailed set of logic to identify those. We've also got all of the out of hospital urgent and emergency care data, and that's about it's about 8 different feeds from DHU. We've got EMAS and we've got the local authority data. So actually, we've got all of that feeding into one place, and what we've got is a kind of my team's built a kind of it's built-in Power Pivot, and it's all of the urgent care data integrated together, and you can cut it all, you can dice it, and it's been really useful with this project. There's also we've got patient journey information. I'll come on to that in a bit. So what we've been able to pull out, we can pull out the demographics. I'll flip to this one, this slide. And what you can see here is here's all our GP practices, and what you can see is actually around the periphery, we're getting very low numbers of SDEC, and that's because they're going cross-border. So the patients up here are going into Derby, etc. So I think this demonstrates really nicely. We probably need to work together as a system on all our logic. Certainly the UHL logic, you'd never work it out. It's so I'm very happy to share that. And actually, if we all share that through and get that working, we can build all of that into our data sets. The patient journey's been really useful. So what we've done here is we've, rather than looking by activity by individual services, what we're doing is tracking the patient through their system, through the system. And what we're doing is using pseudonymized NHS numbers. We're looking at each patient when they had the last contact, and if they have another contact within 3 days, we're clustering those together, and we're developing a map of where patients flow through the system. Now, what this allows us to do is, I suppose it's that old question when you put in a new service: is that service stopping people and treating them and turning them round and doing everything it should do, or is it adding another step in the process? And what we can do here is we can have a look and see we can see patients bouncing around through the system. We can see where services are actually deflecting people away from hospital and where they're not. So looking at urgent care, looking at a STEC and rapid access clinic, what we can see is here is all of our the most common pathways within 9 months. And what you can see, most people actually go to a STEC clinic. They don't have anything else, and that's about a quarter of the patients. We've got about 8,000 out of them who are having really quite complex pathways. A lot of these are patients who are actually having STEC or rapid access clinic. They're having it after an admission, which is something we'd I suppose I'd not imagine was going to happen. So what we're going to do is split those out. You can see as well, you've got the pathway we're really looking to foster is the 111 into STEC. Actually, we're only getting about 600 patients who've done that, whereas the 111 into ED into STEC, actually you've got 3 times as many. And even with EMAS, you've got many more, so going via ambulance. So actually, this just shows actually there's a real opportunity there to avoid that ED. You can also look where following a STEC, actually people are admitted, and count all of those. Actually, much smaller than the number of patients going through, which is really good. What we can also do is have a look, and this is the first contact they had in the system, and how many went into same-day emergency care, etc. Now, what you can see is actually out of 111 and our clinical navigation hub, very few people who are going into same-day emergency care are going there directly. You've only got about 5% of people. It's still small again for urgent care centres, and fairly small for EMAS actually. So actually this gives us a really clear KPI we can track, or set of KPIs we can track through the months, and this is the group of patients who we can really work on and improve, cutting their pathway down. And we've got another one which maps things by time and time of day, etc. Very similar to Anna's, not quite as pretty though. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through what we've done. Any questions on that?
David, thank you very much. So this is quite a different use of data to see how patients are getting into clinics and what that patient journey looks like, which I think it really does give, particularly that monitoring of patients moving through pathways and seeing how they've perhaps contacted 111 or they've contacted the 9s and had an ambulance service appointment, or not appointment, but contact, followed by ED, followed by STEC, really shows you where opportunity lies in terms of service change and service improvement. Are there any questions from Team Northampton or Kettering, or from anyone else about how it was constructed, how difficult it was to construct? It sort of strikes me that tracking patients back through their NHS numbers is a horribly complicated thing to do and fraught with difficulty. But any questions from anyone on that? David, you might have got off lightly.
I think the actual logic, the actual code to track patients through is really quite simple. I could give that around. I think the hard bit is gathering all the information from all the different services and making that, I suppose, you get the data in a very raw form. You have to do a lot of work on it to make it actually match what the services would see on the ground. So, for example, the 111, you get kind of lots and lots of appointments, and you look at them, and they're actually, we'll talk to the patient. Here's the triage appointment. Here's the next one where they speak to somebody, and actually, maybe a single call will have 4 different lines, and you've got to be able to work out how you get that down and go, right, this is a 111 contact. We've got the relevant bits of information from each of the 4 lines and merged it into one. So that's the hard bit. Once you've got that, then actually combining it together is really easy.
Brilliant, David. Thank you so much. So please do reach out to David, or either through us or directly after this if there's stuff in what he's just described that I think would be of interest. And then Nick, we're going to come to you to sort of for the final of the show and tells, as it were. So Nick has done a tremendous job. So Lincolnshire are sort of started later in the journey of pulling their data together and their dashboard together, and Nick has done a tremendous job, an incredible job, where the sort of the curve of change to this has been absolutely incredible over the last couple of months. So I really excited to see him present this to you, and hopefully that you'll get a really good feel for what is possible in quite a short time scale. Using something that visually looks a little bit more straightforward, but I'm sure as it gets integrated into other systems, we'll move more and more towards something that looks like Derby's BBC interface. So Nick, over to you.
Cheers, Jim. Thank you, sir. So I'll just share the screen. Just bear with me. So I will say it was it's relatively new. It was thrown together relatively quickly. My biggest problem is, sorry, is that visible to everyone? Is it readable, or is it on your screen?
It's just arriving now.
So much like Anna's, like I sort of said a while back, the metrics and the principles of the metrics are very similar in terms of the SDEC falling off the back of an inpatient data set, as well as using an ED data set for other metrics. My biggest problem was when I created this, deciding on what the metrics were, because I kind of did it all myself, and I didn't really work with anybody in the department itself, which probably should have done, but due to site pressures, etc., I decided to give it a go on my own, really. But I was pleased that Anna's metrics are quite similar to mine, which leads me to believe I'm sort of heading in the right direction. In terms of your EMAS question, like yourself, Anna, I couldn't get it from our system, so I went to EMAS. I spoke to somebody in EMAS, and there is they send out a monthly data sheet for everywhere in what looks like in the East Midlands, and it does say this is where I get this 9 from there. So there was 9 ambulance arrivals straight to SDEC. It's a file which somebody in your organisation must get, I assume. But I can tell you, I've just had a look. There was 25 in Northampton and 17 in Kettering. Is that in Northamptonshire, Kettering? So that's your numbers for February, if that helps. If you can't get that file, I don't mind emailing you that every week, because like I say, every month, it's a monthly file. It just has all the EMAS arrivals and where exactly on your site the patient goes to. So I can tell you that if you can't get hold of the file, I can tell you. But like I say, that's an EMAS file. That was the only way I could get the EMAS direct to SDEC. Our system doesn't hold that. I've tried to get hold of some patient identifiers and see how it's documented on ours, but there's just no link at all, so I'm wholly reliant on that file, to be honest with you. But like I say, in terms of the other metrics, they are the same. Well, I don't want to say the same. They're very similar to the Derbyshire one. The ED one's just standard. It's documented as an intended ward. So when they're being triaged or when they're being seen, that's when they decide an intended ward. It's slightly different to the inpatient number, because some point during some patients' journeys that does change, and it's not changed within the data set. This is the trouble with using 2 data sets. I think the ED data set and the inpatient data set are different, to be honest with you. It gives a good idea, shall we say. So I've used a referral source option as well, 111 or the UTC, which is the urgent treatment centre. It's on the same site type of thing. It's almost within the ED department as well. Again, like the Derbyshire one, there's average time in the ED in the department before they before they hit departure, assuming they go to SDEC as the departure. And just for information purposes, the longest one and the shortest one. Again, so them first 6, they're all off the back of the ED data set, the A&E data set. We move on to the inpatient data. This is what I think is the better one of the two. This is standard number of admissions broken down into weekdays and weekends. Again, the SDECs are open. I think it's 8 till 6 every day, but occasionally they're open longer depending on the nature of the ED department. And the same with the weekends. There, I think it's still 8 till 6 at the weekends. There is talk of it going 24/7. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. They've been talking about it a long time. This is the number from A&E. This is what technically should match up with the ED ones with an attended ward of SDEC, but they don't. They're not a million miles apart, but again, this is off the back of a different data set, so it's hard to quantify, to be fair, but this is more reliable than the ED one, I've always said. This is your ICD-10 code, the diagnosis list, as I call it. These are the ones, the percentage of the admissions who had a primary diagnosis on the list, i.e. those who should be going into SDEC. And that's the same, but those who came via the A&E department into SDEC with a code were off the list. Going down a bit further, other inpatient wards. These are just all admissions to other inpatient wards excluding SDEC. And these are all admissions to other inpatient wards excluding SDEC during the opening hours of SDEC. These are just for information purposes. Again, I don't know whether they're totally relevant. Moving down to length of stay. These are in hours. So the SDEC average per month, shall we say, the average per month is so roughly 3 hours, just a bit shorter for those come via ED. But going into, bear with me. The bottom one's the key one, I think. It's a length of stay for non-SDEC, for every other inpatient ward really, but those what have had a scenario on the list, that's what I think could be your missed opportunities, as you call it. That's where I think I could elaborate on that somewhere. Like I say, it's just been slung together relatively quickly with view to certainly presenting it a bit better. That's where I'm going to be tapping your panel, if you like, for some of your work. But that's a very quick overview, shall we say, of it.
Nick, thank you very much.
And, sorry, just one more thing. Sorry, there is, like I said before, there is 2 sites in Lincoln. They're 2 separate dashboards at the minute because they only started with one of the sites. But I'd like to do it sort of like Anna's, where at the push of a click of a cell, you can get them both, mate, just for ease of viewing, if you like.
That's fabulous. So you didn't click onto them, but you've taken some of that data and then set those as run chart SBCs.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't click on it. Yeah, there is
that's
working
okay. That's all right.
On each one with it's literally just one SPC chart, to be honest with you. It is a work in progress. It's well.
I think what it does show is that even within something that is presented in that Excel sheet, you can see the journey, can't you? So you could see within that the volumes of patients changing over a period of time. And the opportunity and things like the length of stay in your emergency department before patients flow onto your SDEC facility, what the volumes of patients coming through a variety of different presentation routes look like. And I think that's really empowering to then know where you should be applying your efforts and your thoughts towards improvement. Right. We will open it up to questions for Nick to start with, but then sort of more general questions or thoughts from Kettering and Northampton's teams. Sage, you're first.
It's with regards to the ICD-10 code, which you have mentioned from ED referral to medical SDEC. So you have shown the figures that they are constantly increasing in percentage. Are we, because mostly in what we are getting as the referrals from the urgent care, so from ED department will be query PE and query this and query this. Are we getting this as an ICD-10 code, or are we getting the ICD-10 code when they are diagnosed?
The ICD-10 code it doesn't come off the back of the ED data. It comes off the back of the inpatient data, and that's the primary diagnosis. That's the only way at the minute I can do that. Off the ED side of it, it'll be a sort of ECDS coding, or we have a free text coding, which is a free text cell, which is not practical and it won't work, to be honest with you. But the ICD-10 coding is solely off the inpatient data set.
Okay.
Thank you, Said. Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Just, I don't know if it's a word of caution. So the number of admissions via the SDEC that are captured on our IRIS system are again off a button press from the crew on scene. So they would select SDEC out of the options when they're leaving scene. So at number one, some of them get that wrong and they press for ED if your SDECs are next door to each other. If they're telephoning SDEC on the way, unfortunately, they've got to press a button to say they're leaving scene. So some of the time they're going to EDs and then they get the OK to go to the SDEC. So I think it's one of the problems we're facing in Northamptonshire is that when I look at that information and I get the data from the SDEC, there's a mismatch between them. And actually, we know the crews are using SDECs, but unfortunately, they're pressing the wrong buttons.
Yeah, yes, it's a bit like here we have GP referrals to SDEC, and they come to SDEC via ED, and they're almost when they're being admitted to SDEC are treating them from ED, not straight from not as a GP referral, if you like. It's the trouble with ED and SDEC is pretty much in the same place, if you like, and it's once they go to SDEC, they seem to be going via ED, and that's almost the be all and end all. They come through ED and it supersedes any either referral, or probably the same with the EMAS side of it as well.
Yeah, and as we're developing here, what we're finding is that the triage systems at both of the acutes are actually then sliding them over to SDEC, but the EMAS side of it have said they've gone to A&E. So I don't think we've got a complete grip on it. It's a great start. I think EMAS has got a lot of patience to make sure we press the right buttons. Our crews do that.
Yeah, to be honest with you, the EMAS file I get, it's a really good file. The trouble with it is it doesn't have any patient identifiers, so I can compare things on our system. So that's the only sort of downside. But it is a really good file. It tells you sort of exactly where in the entire hospital site the patient is going. It's really good. But like I say, it'll be good to sort of match one or two patients or a handful of patients on our system as well, just to see how they're being documented sort of from our side. But I can't really do that, to be honest, because the EMAS file doesn't have anything on it to link them up.
No, and we will be able to do that internally, Nick. The incident, we run off an incident number, and behind that incident number there will be a care record, and within that care record will be an NHS number. So, who's your quality lead? I know that Sam Smith in Links is not currently at work. So who have you been dealing with? Is it I'm trying to think of a name.
It's Laura. It's Laura, isn't it, Nick, who's in post now to cover from Mark Hall that we link in with from the EMAS side?
Oh, Laura Golden, is it Laura? Yes. So Laura has sent me some patient identifiers in the past, to be fair, just before I knew this big EMAS file existed, to be honest with you, and it just so I could sort of match a few up, and it didn't really work, to be honest with you, and that was more because of our system, the way they were recording it. It's just not I don't even think it's an option, to be honest with you, to say an EMAS drop down is not an option. I don't think. I think that's where the problem was.
Yeah, it is very labour intensive to get you that patient information out of ours.
Yeah. To be honest with you, that's why I was happy with the file and just plucking off the number. To be honest with you, just for ease of doing it, rather than it's because I know the few numbers what Laura did send me. I think it was a bit of a challenge for her to get them to me and this type of thing. So I was happy just to take the number off the sheet, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Nick, it might be worth just triangulating that with the SDECs just for 1 month, of whether they keep a log of what comes direct from EMAS and see how reliable that data is.
Yeah, to be honest with you, that could be a good option, because I know our SDEC is part of them are quite old fashioned. They do use a lot of pen and paper to record things, I believe, and I might. I could even go down and see, sort of ask the question in person rather than an emailed conversation, which you never get an answer from, because I can easily go down there. So that might be a good option to see it from their side, see how they're recording it, such like.
Brilliant. That sounds like a sensible way of checking in. Right, David, you've got a question next.
Well, just 2 comments. The first one is about the EMAS. We in LLR get a EMAS data set, patient level, all the details you're saying, but with the NHS numbers. Now, we get that as commissioners. I suspect at the moment, the way things are, there would be a bit of a struggle with IG to share that with providers. I think as we move into an ICS, we should be at a stage where actually we can all use each other's data, and something like that you would be able to integrate with your own data. But that's probably an avenue to explore. Second thing I was going to say was a bit of a comment about, we're seeing exactly where the recorded referral for a patient or disposal for a patient doesn't match what actually happens. So, for example, with DHU, we're seeing about between 20 and 30% of patients who have been referred back to primary care actually turn up at ED within a few days. So I suspect it's probably universal on that recording, and I think it would be that's one of the reasons why we've gone down the journey route rather than believing what's recorded. Because
I think it's universal. I think it's probably one of those things which I don't think you can probably ever get to the bottom of it.
No, I'd agree with you.
It's a tricky one, shall we say?
Fantastic, David. Thank you. Nick, thank you. Any more questions from the Northampton Kettering teams? Not obviously. Okay, so Nick, David, Anna, thank you so much. I think you presented sort of 3 really different ways that you can look at the data around sort of alternative pathways, SDECs, using that to understand what opportunity looks like, and using that to understand what performance looks like.
Thank you for having me and let me see the other 2 scorecards. It was definitely an eye-opener, very useful, no doubt about it.
What I'd be really interested from sort of thoughts from the Kettering and Northampton teams are, do they feel like dashboards of information that would be useful to you, would be beneficial to service delivery, to service improvement? How does that feel now that you've seen those? Do they feel realistic in terms of what you feel you'd be able to pull together and start to use? Claire.
Good afternoon. Absolutely, from a dashboard perspective. So from a medical SDEC dashboard perspective, we did have quite a good dashboard up a couple of years ago. We've had quite a lot of changes with the way our footprint works and how our SDEC activity is being achieved. So we're trying to work closely with our BI team now to get that up and running. I think Sabi was aware I had complete dashboard envy, because I really want another one back up and running. So absolutely, it's priority for us at the moment. And literally while I've been on this call, I've been messaging my BI lead to say, come on, let's get this up and running now. So there's some great suggestions in there. And actually, once ours is up and I've been trying to find the old one that we used to use, because obviously that data is not there anymore. But absolutely. Oh, I can see Jess has just put her hand up as well.
Jess.
So I was just going to jump in off the back of what Claire said as well, and also, off the back of what Lee said, we recognise that issue around the fact that our EMAS crews who are, reported against SDEC are actually turning up in ED first, which is why we are locally consolidating our own data and reviewing those spreadsheets that EMAS send out, and that will also form part of the collaborative meetings that we're establishing to discuss those conveyances and working with those teams. And also, I noticed earlier on, I didn't jump jump in. Apologies, because I just joined your meeting late. I was looking at your data that you presented around the 111 referrals into ESDEC, and I just wanted to say, sort of from a local perspective, some of the challenges around that are, or we've been told, is actually around the 111 clinicians themselves actually knowing to select ESDEC as a potential pathway for patients. At the minute, we've set up a PE pathway direct from 111, but that depends on a clinician to clinician conversation. But again, even with that, it's that clinician knowing to select us as a potential pathway for those patients. So it's kind of a really, as a working group, I guess it's around what work is going to be happening with our 111 colleagues to help support and raise that, and how will that be addressed from their side, because we can do all this work, which we are doing, but it needs to be the whole effort, doesn't it, the whole system to make it work.
Jess, thank you so much. I think you're right, it does need the whole system to sort of come together and to share their data and to sort of try and iron out the gaps in the data. One of these, so I say this amongst friends, particularly those who I'm now going to offend dismally by criticising the fact that they're always obsessed with getting brilliant data. But obviously, often our business analysts and our sort of data analysts do fabulous jobs in getting us really, really high quality data, and they hate using rubbish data. But sometimes rubbish data is all we've got. And actually, sometimes we're much better off using the rubbish data, at least to start to get a feel for what's going on. Because if we wait for the great data, we end up with nothing. And you end up just operating in a void of information, because some of the data is great, some of it's rubbish. And until we integrate all of our systems and integrate all of our IT solutions, we're never going to get the sort of data that sometimes we aspire to. So I'd really urge you not to, don't worry too much about some of the, and a good example perhaps is this ambulance service data that Nick's got on his dash, which I think shows a really nice trend, even if the volumes within it aren't entirely accurate. I still think it gives you enough information to be able to sort of plan services and think about. So try not to get too wedded to really, really high levels of data quality in the initial phases, because you can always tease that out as you go along and adjust those. And again, apologies to all of the data analysts who are appalled by what I've just said. I understand exactly why you're appalled. But there is a genuine conflict of interest between sometimes just having something that is dirty and works reasonably well for service change and service delivery. Any other thoughts from anyone before we wrap up and we close? It doesn't look like it. Well, in that case, we're just a couple of minutes before 3. So I'm gonna bring us together. So this was a special session. It was a special session that we brought together because we wanted to share with you as Northampton Kettering some of the actions that have been undertaken by other systems to look at these dashboards of measurement and dashboards of performance around mainly ESDEC, but actually building into all other alternative pathways. There is going to be, I think, a trend over the next 12 months or so to move from not looking at ESDEC alone, but looking to all of the other pathways, and in particular things like frailty pathways, surgical ESDEC pathways, and community response. So understanding which of those patients are not coming to the acutes at all, but are going straight back out into the community responders and are having all of their care delivered at home, or who've perhaps come to the hospital and then are going back out into the community. So although this has had a very ESDEC focus, now I think the future of this will be a slightly broader remit within the ICSs in terms of the sorts of information we might want to go for. But I really do hope it's given you some sort of useful thoughts, some useful tools. It's definitely a number of useful contacts, and we'll support any conversations that you might want to have with those people beforehand. But I will then finish by thanking once again Anna, David, who's dashed off to go and continue to be poorly somewhere else, and Nick for coming across, spending your time. We will share as much information as those three can give to us with you all, so that you've got it and you can play with it and understand it. And if you do have any questions for the three of them, if you haven't got their contact details, I think they're all in the chat. then come through Sabir probably rather than me, because my emails tend to get ignored for a number of days, and we'll link you up with people in the right sort of a way so that you get the answer to those. But thank you for your time this afternoon. A brilliant session. I really enjoy looking at those 3 dashboards being presented again. I've seen it a couple of times, and all of them I think are fabulous, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.